Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
Hey, it's William, and welcome to today's episode of the Catalytic Leadership Podcast. Each week, we tackle a topic related to the field of leadership. My goal is to ensure that you have actionable steps you can take from each episode to grow in your own leadership. Growth doesn't just happen. My goal is to help you become intentional about it. Each week, we spotlight leaders from a variety of fields, organizations, and locations. And my goal is for you to see that leaders can be catalytic no matter where they are or what they lead. I draw inspiration from the stories and journeys of these leaders, and I hear from many of you that you do too. Let's jump into today's interview. I'm so excited today to have Kerry-Ann Powell on the podcast. Kerry-Ann is a global business strategist, a speaker, and a champion of small and medium-sized businesses. Her varied experience of over 20 years as a Washington, D.C. attorney, lobbyist, and fundraiser positions her as an authority on what it takes to strategically succeed while confronting difficult obstacles. After raising $120 million to build the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Site, launched her strategic business and consulting firm, Trafalgar Strategies, she and her team now advise business owners from various industries and countries on creating the strategies, the systems, and the mindsets to thrive in business and in life. Kerry-Ann, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being on the show.
My goodness, I'm so excited to be here, William. This is so wonderful. Thank you.
I would love to begin with you sharing a little bit of your story with our listeners. I shared some of the high points, but I'd love to hear a little more about your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
Yeah, well, I think leadership, oftentimes people feel that leadership is one of those things that you're born innately with or something. Don't you notice that? You're like, she's a born leader. But I believe leadership is taught and learned.
Yeah.
And almost, to be honest, you hear people talk about, oh, I'm learning a language versus I'm acquiring a language. Like those of us who are native English speakers, acquired English. We didn't learn it, right?
Right.
Versus I'm learning Spanish right now, and I guarantee you I'm acquiring it. I'm truly learning.
That's right.
So it's a thing. I think that for leadership, I acquired it through watching my parents. My parents were strong leaders in their careers and in their communities and in our family. So leadership was a thing that I observed, and so then I sort of sucked it in, and also was taught leadership. I took advantage of opportunities while growing up and as a young adult to learn leadership by being in leadership, leadership roles as a young adult, and sort of saw that. So I think my journey into leadership and being able to be, particularly as a strategist, was also acquired and learned also, both at the same time. So when I got out of university, my first real job out of college was I worked for the United Way in our local community, and I was just like, it was going to be a short stint. I don't know if you're familiar with the United Way back in the day, right? It was definitely one of the most sort of pillar entities in most communities where they, for those, if you have international listeners, although they are an international organization, but for international listeners, it's basically a nonprofit organization that raises money within the community from employers and employees in corporations. And then they have a board of directors that divvy up the funds and give them to the local entities that need it. So that was my first job. I was sort of a speakers and tours person.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome. It was kind of fun. It was like a 6-month gig. And at that time, I didn't realize at that time that I always thought of charity as a sort of like, people just volunteering and being all, lovey-dovey and everything like that. Didn't realize there's an actual leadership role and business and role and around that. And so when I first did that for 6 months, I was like, I kind of got hooked at the idea of all these professionals doing this amazing work to like build our communities in a different entity. Because you always think of sort of governmental entities, and then we think of sort of that's sort of the main place that you kind of think of, and then you think of sort of corporate entities. But there's that whole entity of civic organizations, civil entities that play a significant role in how we engage in life for the most part. So I left when I was finished with that. When you're in your early 20s, you don't really think you're better than you really are. I walked into the office of the vice president of development, and I said, you know what? You should hire me as a division director because I would do a great job, probably the best division director that you have.
That's awesome.
Oh, and I love the fact that she just didn't poo-poo me or anything. She just said, thank you for saying that. I will keep that in mind. Anyway.
That's awesome.
And a couple months later, she called me in for an interview and said, well, we have a position for a division director position. And it's not for the largest numbers, not for the very big number companies, but for our donors that are a little smaller, but would like to bring you in because I do see you have potential. She brought me in, and within a year, I moved up into larger in sale would be like larger sales books, but in nonprofits, sort of like entities that gave more money.
Yeah, right.
And then I was training other division directors, and basically, it just became a thing. And I realized I was good at it. I was very good at asking for large sums of money.
That's a gift.
And I was also very good because of, obviously this is a large organization, millions of dollars running through. I had a book value of $2 million myself. So we were very strategic in the way that things operated. And so that's really where I started cutting my teeth on strategic planning. And so I had acquired some leadership skills, but I was learning also, right, how to ask for large sums of money, because basically what they do is they paired us with, you had a volunteer, sort of a CEO of a company who had some very respect in the community, in the city, and you and her, at that time was mainly the he's, but you and you and her would go and basically, chat up the CEO of another company to get them to agree to donate large sums of money to the United Way, and also to agree to do campaigns for their employees to give. And so I observed how these individuals, how these two sort of titans of industry were interacting, and I would just suck it in, right? And then sort of begin to play that out, because it's one thing to be able to feel comfortable asking for large sums of money. It's another thing to know how the game is played. And so during that period of time in my life, I was learning a couple of things. I was learning how to be a good leader because I had a team. I was learning how to ask for large sums of money in the way that people would respond. I was learning how to be strategic, and I was definitely learning how everything that we as individuals do affect other people. We're all so connected that it's just we're not on an island at all. And so anything that I did, if I had a meeting that I did a meeting very well, then that CEO would decide to give more money, which means that their employees would give more money, which means that we had more money to give to an agency like a domestic violence shelter, which was able to then be able to have a school so that the kids in the domestic violence shelter could have a larger education, which means that we have a more educated populace. So we're all connected. So that was really the beginning of, I would say, leadership, obviously from home, because I learned that from my parents. But that was the first sort of big old step into learning what it means to be a leader, and what it means to make big moves. Like, what does it mean to have a big project, a big goal, a big idea, and be able to make it happen strategically and also through your leadership.
It is so absolutely fascinating, Kerry, to see that journey and that progression.
Yeah.
And you didn't stop there. I mean,
I didn't. I did that for a few years. And then once it's interesting again. Oftentimes people, William, you talk to people all day long, right? Interviewing and obviously in the work that you do. And we always think we have a plan in our lives. And we we create this plan a bit within an isolated chamber, not recognizing that every path we take then leads us to another path. Originally, I wanted to be a doctor. I went to school to be pre-med, but something happened, didn't do so well in physics. Organic chem wasn't my friend. I was like, you know what? I'll
Me too.
But nonetheless, so while I was there doing all of this great stuff, I began to learn more about some of the challenges that we were facing in our community and what is happening in the rest of the country at the time, because you begin to see, so for instance, we have the largest domestic violence shelter in the Northeast, in the Southeast area. I was like, everyone used to like brag about it, like, oh, we've got the school on site, we can bring all of these women who have been domestically abused, blah, blah, blah. And my brain was like, but why do we have domestic violence again? Like, remind me.
Right.
How come this happens?
Yeah.
And so at the time, I was never exposed to it, so I didn't know. And when I began to become exposed to it, I really realized that this is a really big problem. The same thing with so many, there was this great organization that did consumer rights, sort of helped people get out of debt or understand, how to purchase things differently and how to manage, get the best mortgage and those kinds of things. I'm like, well, why is it so difficult? That was the question. Like, why is it so difficult? Why can't just everyday people who be able to figure out how to do these things? So I began to sort of look and see, oh, there's a whole other layer to this. There are policies that are involved with how we as human beings in our everyday life, whether they're local policies or whether they were, federal policies or state policies. So I decided to go to law school, and I became a Washington, D.C. attorney and lobbyist, and started doing a great deal of work along these issues, trying to tackle big problems from a federal level and see how we could fix them. And that's what I did for a number of years, and really enjoyed that until I found out that they were building a memorial to Martin Luther King in the National Mall. And one of my good friends sent me, she actually was working with me, and she's a lobbyist as well. And at the time I was heading up a program. And because I was heading up the program, obviously we had to also raise money. I had to have comments. She's like, "You're like the best person that raises money in our, all the other directors were like, how are you raising them?" I'm like, well, I'll tell you a little secret. There's this thing called the United Way. Like, oh my God, William, because it's like the people who are the best salespeople were the people who were raised Jehovah's Witness. I'm telling you, they have no show. They grew up very comfortable talking to people, and they're just the best salespeople because they believe it. They're going to go out and do it. So if you hire someone on your sales team that grew up with Jehovah's Witness, I'm just saying, it's going to work.
Tips right here for business owners everywhere.
It's going to work for you. Okay. Anyways, I was like, so then I started doing that. So she knew that I had a history of fundraising. And so she's like, Kerry-Ann, did you know they were building a memorial to Martin Luther King? I said, I had no idea. For real? Like, obviously every city and state has a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King, but this is in the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where we honor our presidents and our veterans of war. I'm like, what? I didn't even think this was happening. So they were looking for someone to do corporate fundraising. I said, well, I happen to know a little thing about that. So I put my hat in the ring. They hired me, and then a year later, they asked me to be the full chief fundraiser of the program. At that time, we had about, I think when I came on board, we're probably at 28 million, 30 million, depending upon the time that I count. Me and my team, we ended up raising 120 plus million, because it was 120 to build it. Plus we'd raise another 8 million for all the celebratory stuff afterwards. Because, you've got heads of state and all that kind of stuff coming in. So so that was really the journey. And I told myself, oh yeah, I'm just going to do this for 2-3 years. And then I'm going to go back to the law. Several years later. years later, here I am, and I started my business after we built it, and
Wow,
it's
that's amazing. Living in the DMV area, I've had the opportunity to visit that site a number of times. And whenever people come into town, family or friends come into town, we take them downtown and show them the sights. And that's always one that we stop at because it's so incredibly moving
it's moving, isn't
and incredibly, incredibly. And I grew up in Alabama, in Birmingham, actually.
it? Mhm.
And so,
You have a
growing up
history.
in a place like there's a great deal of history. And to be in a place like right there on the tidal basin and you're in that environment and reading those quotes, it's just it's a very powerful place. So for those listeners who haven't had that opportunity to visit DC, when you do not miss this particular memorial because it makes a difference. And when I read in your bio that you were like in charge of raising money for this, I was like, there's no way. That's so amazing. And so just on a personal level, I really wanted to talk to you and to hear so many ways that your leadership has changed and grown, and your impact has changed and grown over the years. That is so inspiring to me, and I know to every leader who's listening. There's
I'm getting a little teary-eyed, William. Gotta stop.
it's I
Got a
think
little
it's
mascara on.
that's awesome. I think it's so important for people to understand that impact is really one of the highest callings of leadership. And as you grow in your leadership, you will grow in your impact. And that's what I hear when I listen to your
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah, and well, just to before I comment on that, after building the memorial, and I guess I should share this because people, I think, sometimes don't recognize that this is a normal part of building a big thing or pushing a big thing up the mountain. I was a little lost after we built it. Now, they asked me to stay on board to help to build an education foundation, which is now still there, and it's great. So I felt good about it. So I spent about 1.5 years, 2 years helping to build an education foundation around the memorial.
Wow. Oh,
But
wow.
during that time, I was like, what next?
Yeah.
Right? What is the next thing for
Yeah.
me? Because I couldn't go back to the law. I
Yeah.
had done this big thing, and I know, although I love the law, I knew that wasn't my next step. I wasn't going to go
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
but yet I wasn't really sure what's the next step. And I would often go to the memorial, particularly at the nighttime. I'm sure. Have you been down there at night?
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
I would go down there at night just to sort of, it was really a spiritual experience for me
Yeah.
being there at nighttime, just to sort of be still and hear what it is that my next step was. And it wasn't like it was like, some voice from heaven telling me, but I used that period of time of feeling like I was just really still, a bit in the valley, a bit,
Yeah.
to begin to take first steps as to what it could
Mm.
look like. So I knew that I wanted to, make bigger impact, but I also knew that I wasn't really sure I wanted to do fundraising per se. That was the
Yeah.
next step, right? So everyone
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, come and help to do this." I had a whole bunch of headhunters come and be like, "Come and do this," or a lot of folks who knew me. And to be honest with you, this business that I have is actually a second iteration of the business. I originally did go into doing consulting for NGOs and their boards, and actually did some fundraising as well
Hmm.
from a consultant perspective. And I remember I sort of had an office in Manhattan, an office in DC, and I was on a train from DC going to Manhattan for like one of it's one of my favorite clients. He was a celebrity who had an art foundation, and it's just exciting to work with people who are doing really amazing things. And I was going to be doing a board strategy day and helping with fundraising strategy and so forth. And as I was on the train going up, I remember, you know how I don't know when if you had the quiet car in the Acela. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
still there or not.
Yeah.
But and I was like, listening to some music, and I was sort of writing some notes. And as I was beginning to build the business, and I saw in the future, I'm like, if I build the business as it is, because I think I brought in a couple team members by that, and I was like, I actually don't want this to be it. Like, I just
Mm.
don't want this iteration of just working with, large NGOs on fundraising strategy to be the only thing I want to do. But I wasn't really sure exactly how to transition out. I was still doing quite a bit of speaking, and I wasn't really sure. I actually took some time off and went to Spain, and I was like, oh, I'll just go there for a year and kind of do a thing and whatever. But the point is, what evolved from that was me just taking smaller steps and me begin to sort of say, okay, what am I loving about my current business, and what am I not loving about my current business? And one of the things I knew I didn't want to do was actual fundraising anymore.
Yeah.
Even though, I don't know if you've read that book, The Big Leap,
I don't think so. No.
by Gay Hendricks. And it's excuse me, Gay Hendricks is a psychologist out of he works at he's out of, I think it's UCLA or Berkeley, one of the California schools that has a strong reputation. And he also does work with titans of business, large Fortune 500 companies and their CEOs. And basically the theory behind the Big Leap is we have, and I'm gonna butcher some of the zones here, but there's a couple of zones that he considers people work within.
Mm-hmm.
So the zone of competence, you can do the thing, right?
Yeah.
There's the zone of excellence, which you do the thing real well and you get rewarded for the thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the zone of genius, where it's the place that most people don't move into, but it's the place that all of us have. But the thing is, we get stuck oftentimes in the zone of excellence or in the zone of competence, because those are the two areas that we are often rewarded for. Like, so if you are,
that's true.
So for instance, me, fundraising, that would have been my zone of excellence, right?
Yeah.
Like, stay there. You're good at what you do. Just do it. And that's what originally I did. I sort of got sucked into that space where I know how to fundraise. People want me to come and help them with their fundraising, and I could do it as a consultant. So I'm not on staff. So, you can, charge a bit more, and you can build a team, and you can have, all this great, opportunities to sort of work with all these interesting organizations, which is what I really love. I love that, to see where people are doing interesting things. But it was as I began to see that in the future, I'm like, this is actually not what's sparking me. And I don't think it's necessarily my excellence, my zone of excellence, and or my zone of genius.
Yeah.
And so from there, I had to really start walking to what it was that I thought, and what was it that I think even when I'm not even doing it, what was it that people were asking me for, or responding to me about, and again, I do think too, zones of genius change as we change. You were talking about impact, right? This idea of if we are beginning to grow, if age is just a way of expansion, then and therefore our zone of genius, I think, expands as well. Nonetheless, at the time, I realized I really was able, I felt my genius was helping leaders, regardless of what they were doing, to really be strategic about some of the things when they want to have big things they want to bring to life. And what does it mean to strategically do that? And also, what does it mean to excellently and exceptionally execute it? Because the thing, William, that I have found, and people used to think, oh, you guys built this big memorial, you must have had like this massive team. We had a very small team, but what we were, and we always used to say this little joke, we're not an okey doke operation here, you know, but it was a small team, and but we had dysfunction in all of its ways, so
Sure.
there's a lot of things that I often look at. I'm like, oh Lord, when I work with businesses, I'm like, so this is what you're not going to do right here.
That's
I've
right.
experienced that, and that's. But then there are some things that we did well. One of it was execution. Once we came up with a strategy, we were going to execute it to the 100%.
Yeah.
And because most strategies, I'm telling you, fancy strategies, good strategies, money back strategies, 67% of them fail because of poor execution. So I like to think of it as, what does it mean to create a good strategy and an excellent execution plan so that you can really get the big thing done? And I think oftentimes, particularly when you start thinking about like small and medium-sized companies, they have an idea of what, they have ideas of what they want to do, but we always shrink it. We do it in life as well. We shrink the ideas based on what we think we can do. The reality is that we can do a whole lot of things big. We have the capacity as humans to do crazy things.
Yeah.
Right? We can go
to
the moon. We can do a lot of things. We've been able to solve many of the diseases that are on this planet. We've been able to do a lot of things. There's now technology that can clean our air. Did you know that?
Yeah.
There's now technology out there that can clean the air that we messed up, Mark. Okay,
Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy. So my thing is, there are things we can do. And also people like, well, that's really for the, I don't know. There's always someone else out there that thinks that, that can do it better or whatever the thing is. But one thing I have come to realize is that the big things that have happened in life usually happen with just a few people, but few committed people. Some crazy person that's willing to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do this thing. And then a couple other crazy people that we call followers, but they're actually leaders in their own right. Okay.
Yes.
And so some crazy people that say, okay, we'll go with it. If you think about all of the major, say, political movements in if you think of the civil rights movement, it started with a couple people around the table. The Memorial Foundation was 3 men sitting around a breakfast table in their homes in Bethesda. Okay.
Wow.
You start thinking about just any big thing that has really ever happened. It's really just because of a few people. I mean, Christianity, right?
Right.
One crazy man called Jesus, and then a whole bunch of 12 crazy guys, right?
Yeah.
Like, it really is only small numbers of people that do big things. So we often think, oh, well, I'm a small business, I'm a medium-sized business, we got the big dogs over there, they can do their thing. But nothing in life has ever really happened without just a small people. And I saw this one quote that goodness gracious, my brain, it's too early in the morning. Hello, Cuba. the guy who
Cuba Gooding?
No, the island of Cuba, the country.
Castro.
Castro, thank you.
There you go. Yeah.
Castro, his quote that Castro said that, he was just sort of talking about the movement. And he said that he had, X number of people that had come on board, but he would have done it with only just a few men. Because the reality is that that's really all it takes. If you passionately believe in your thing and you are leading in a way that's not focused on you, but focused on the thing, people come because they want to do things bigger than themselves. And so they do it, right? And they want to be attached to that if they see that it can work. And so I really often think about when you think about, okay, zones of excellence or zones of genius. It's really comfortable to stay in the zone of excellence. Definitely comfortable to stay in the zone of competence because little big fish, little pond, right?
That's right.
But when you start branching out into the genius zone, it's scary. People are going to look at you a little crazy.
Yeah.
People are going to say, well, why are you leaving this good, safe job over here? Back,
Right.
in DC, they talk about the good, safe job, government job.
That's right.
Why would you leave the good, safe government job over here and then branch out into this madness where we don't even see how it's going to even work, right? But that to me is what going into your genius looks like. And it's scary and it feels crazy, but it's where all the good stuff happens. And if you can be consistent in that space, you can be courageous to step there, then be consistent because it's not going to just come overnight. So if you can be consistent in that space, be strategic, and then make sure you have a couple of crazy people who are just as crazy as you to come along on it.
That's it.
And you execute well. Just execute well. And, I always think you can come up with any identity you can come up with, right? Every company, every business has a sort of identity around its space. We were like, we're not an okey doke operation, okay? We're not okey doke. Even though we were
That's right.
even though we were like, over there? Why are we photocopying these things and cutting them out and whatever? There were things that you're like, what are we doing? Because the other thing, that's the other really, really amazing thing about building a big thing is you have to, everyone wants to get to the top of the mountain, right? Everyone scaling a mountain, everyone wants to get to the peak. Yep. But I have found that the fun happens on the way up there. And I know that sounds cliche and all that stuff, but I'm telling you, that is where the joy of life happens. All we could do is focus on getting to the top. We just want to raise the darn thing, build the darn memorial, particularly when, that we went through all kinds of, we had that major economic crisis. We had Katrina, which was taking all the money from, obviously it was important, right? But all that money was going towards building up New Orleans back again. So there was no money. There was 1 year, a couple of years, in my heyday, I was bringing in 20 million a year. 1 year, I remember looking at the numbers, it was 100,000.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
That was that crisis year. Ain't nobody giving money at that time. Remember when things went down, 2007, 2008?
Yep.
Not a good time for many of us, but definitely not good for raising money for a memorial. I mean, it's just not on the top of everyone's list of priorities. So then we had a pause because there was a domestic terrorist scare. So we had to figure out a way to develop domestic terrorist measures, and that took a year of working through all of the agencies and such. And I mean, it was just, there was a pause there. I'm sorry, but in anything, sales, fundraising, if you are having conversations with people to part with their money, to give you money, and they don't see any progress, you can't really sell a thing. It's
true. It's true.
Some people have vision. They know, okay, I could see it. Those are the crazy ones. We love the crazy ones. But for the most part, most people are not going to buy your product if they don't think that it's moving anywhere. Okay. So, there was a period where that was. So there are going to be times when you are going to be like, why am I here? Why did we do this? This is a hot mess. This is not moving along. So you have to come up with an identity within yourselves around who you are, what you believe to be true, and really just kind of build a team around it. And no one left during that time. No one sort of said, I give up. No one slacked off on the work they did on a daily basis. And when things are turning around, it started turning around, and we knew it. And all the work we did when we didn't see anything growing, no money was coming in, began to sprout up. I don't know if you are a fan of Les Brown. Are you a fan of?
I love Les Brown. Absolutely.
Oh my God, love him. Let's protect him at all costs. So he gives us one of his classic stories, because a lot of his stories are classic.
Yeah.
I don't think over the past 20 years. Don't listen. But he has one of his classic stories that I listen to all the time, and it's called the Chinese bamboo tree. Have you heard that story he's given?
I don't think
he tells us that, only in Les Brown voice, so I can't.
That's right.
But he talks about how there's a bamboo tree, a Chinese bamboo tree, that Once you plant it, it takes 9 years. I think it's 9 years for it to sprout. But you have to still cultivate it. You have to still water it. You have to still feed it. You got to do the thing. But once that time happens, within a couple weeks, it just shoots up several feet. Like it's almost like, and you kind of like, can you imagine being that one who has a Chinese bamboo tree and your neighbors are coming by looking at you watering the ground all like for 9 years?
Nothing there, right?
Nothing happening. Like what's happening? And that is what I'm saying. The strategy, right? The strategy on the end is to build this strong bamboo tree. The tactic is you're going to water it. Another tactic is you're going to feed it. And then what's exceptional execution? You're going to water it and feed it every day. Okay. So that's the execution. Now you don't want to skip a day. Now, some days you might water it and maybe some of the water splatters over here, you're not doing it well. You need to optimize that, go ahead and make sure that the bucket you're using has a good sprout that can get to the plant, that kind of thing. But exceptional execution is doing it all the time, doing it every day when you decide to do it. And so you want to make sure that you got this the strategy to build this bamboo tree for whatever whatever the reason is. Your reason for building your bamboo tree is different than mine, but we're going to build it.
That's right.
How do we, what are the tactics that need to happen? Well, first we got to plant it, then we got to water it, then we got to feed it. And then how do we execute that tactic? We do it every single day, even when for 9 years, even when we don't see the thing, right? And then 9 years, bam, you're looking up and you're like, oh, this is a huge bamboo tree. I didn't realize it. So people always often say, hey, it's an overnight success. Yeah, it was an overnight success for 9 years.
For 9 years. That's so helpful. And I think that's so true. Anybody who has started a business would resonate with that, because there are so many days, so many nights when you are watering the ground and you have to keep that belief that this is going to sprout in due season. This is going to sprout in due time.
Yes.
Oh, I love that, Kerry-Ann. That is so fantastic. Let me ask you.
And don't do it alone. Do it, build a team.
Yes.
I always say, build a team fast. If you have some folks who, most of the folks that work with me, are people who have built a business and have a few team members on their team and they're sort of in the process of scaling. But even if you are early days in the business, build a team fast, because there's an African proverb I always like to say, if you want to go fast, go alone.
Yep.
If you want to go far, go together.
That's it.
Build a team fast. I know that's people are like, well, I don't have any money coming in. Build a team fast. I'm going to die on that hill.
Yes. So good.
Build a team fast. So it's not just you watering. It's you watering. It's your team watering. And that looks different, right? So maybe you're up on the hill looking down and saying, hey guys, water over there. We need switch over here. We need to bring a tarp to whatever we need to do, right? Yes. And then your team is doing the thing, because you can't just be in the business watering all day when you're not being strategic. You have to be deciding, what is the strategic direction that we are moving the team in? And if you're in it, watering, then you're not above it, looking down and seeing, that's why I generals back in the day when, warfare was a thing, I always think of old, you have the battles of the Revolutionary War, for instance. I'm a big fan of Outlander. I know all women love that show. So it's because of history. No, it's because of Jamie. But anyway. No, I love the historical elements of it. Anyway, the show right now is the early days of the War of Independence, okay? And you see these generals and everything, and you're like, how did they battle on the field? Because you think of warfare now today, and it's so different than warfare back in the day. And I heard someone say generals and stuff were always on the hill, on the higher part of the hill, always looking to see what's going, so they can send the messenger down to the troops to tell them, tell the captains and lieutenants. I know I don't know all the names of the different ranks, but the people who are leading down on the ground to do a thing, shift west, shift north, retreat, do the thing. if you're the owner of your business, or you're the leader of your business, and you're sitting there watering that bamboo plant, which is really important, mind you, must happen all the time. It must happen every day in order for this to work. But that means that you're not on the hill looking down to the side. Okay, what patches are dry? What areas do we need to kind of do a thing, to do a switch? You might realize that the way the tactic is executing is not that great. Maybe we should, pivot a bit. Whatever the thing is, you're the one who needs to be looking at that. And if you're only working in the business doing the thing, then you don't have the capacity to be strategic and to be a strategic leader. And you can't tell who's exhausted because, you're working along with them and you're just kind of watering. Then you don't know what strengths people have and what's going on. But if you're above, you can kind of look and see, oh my goodness, that person over here is real good at that, or that person's exhausted, let's shift them out. It allows for you the capacity to be able to move the organization and conduct it in a way that makes it more effective. So when the bamboo plant does spurt up, it spurts up, and all of the bamboo ones are looking the same, and all the little stalks, and it looks good.
How do you stay on top of your game? Like, how do you continue to level up with new leadership skills? Your journey is varied and wide, and so many different experiences and inputs. But the Kerry-Ann you're going to need to be a year, 2, 5 years from now needs to have grown.
It's so interesting you should say that, because one of the things that I've been contemplating this past week is what does it look like, not just for me, but also for the business, right? And I'm always thinking about that. I think it's what's his name? Abraham. I forgot his name, but he's a one of those business gurus who always says, if you sort of look at your business a bit like it's this, I always say it's an entity outside of yourself. He always says, sort of think of it like a hedge fund. It's like the purpose of business is to produce value. You put some things in and then it generates value.
Yeah,
it generates value to the owner. It generates value to the employees, to the customers, to the investors. Basically, it's a value generating entity outside of oneself.
Yeah.
To all of the stakeholders and folks that are connected to it. Now, so you're always having to tend it, and you have to be the person who you are today to tend it isn't the same person that needs to continue to bring it forward. Now, there's some theories around like leadership in business. Some people feel that you should, as if you're the entrepreneur that began the business, at some point you need to bring someone on who is more of an executor, and then at some stage you bring someone on who is a sustainer.
Yeah. And
there's really 4 roles, but I'm forgetting one of them. But it's this concept of the lifespan of the personality within the business. It sort of goes like this when someone else comes in and goes like that, and then there's this, and that's how you can sustain a business.
Yeah.
There's another theory around it. So the idea here is the entrepreneur kind of begins to walk away a bit once you've kind of done the thing. And I'm truly an entrepreneur. But I do believe in terms of personality type. I mean, all entrepreneurs, but in terms of my style of personality. But nonetheless, there's also a different school of thought that if you are, there's sort of 3 roles of an entrepreneur, of a business owner. You have the entrepreneur, which is the person who likes to take the risk and likes to do the big things. There's the kind of talent, the person who's really the face of things, does the thing, whatever the thing, does the dance, whatever. Yeah. And then there's kind of the manager / sustainer person. Okay. And the idea is, instead of it feeling like you have to sort of do this, walk away, and then, whatever, it's kind of like you need all 3 people. You need someone to you need someone to represent each 3 entities of that working in it. So if you are sort of a full-on entrepreneur, meaning you love risk, you love, building teams, whatever, then you want to definitely immediately, as soon as you can, bring someone on who loves who's going to be the face, the actor, the the talent, and then you need to bring someone on who's going to be the manager.
Yeah.
And so that's the other theory, is that you stay in it, but you build your team around it. So there's that, and then there's this. I think you can do a hodgepodge of it, right? But in the end, I really think that whatever it is that you do, you need to sort of think about how you can evolve with it. Because isn't the whole point of any big thing? You grow and you evolve and you strengthen. I believe leaning into your strengths, but I also think a part of life is growth. So to answer your question, what I often do is I put myself in environments where they are kind of people that are way more further along than I am.
Yeah.
And I put myself there, and I kind of feel like I'm 12 years old again, wearing my mother's shoes. Oh no, my mom, both my parents were clothes horses. Okay. God bless them. And my dad is passed, but my mom still is, and she is.
Oh my goodness.
So I just, I think I was wearing heels at age 6, little cute little shoes that they give for 6-year-olds. And I love me some heels. Right now, I did a little ankle spring a couple years back, and I can't wear them as much, but I still do love stilettos. So my point is, though, I always used to wear my shoes around with my mom's high heel shoes, and you don't, you feel, you haven't grown into it yet, but you're kind of there, like, look at me, I'm so cool. And then I put her jewelry on, the things are hanging down to my knees, whatever. The point is, though, I try to put myself in environments where people who are way further along, so that it's almost like being on top of the mountain and seeing over the hill a bit. And that goes back to being the general, right? You can see a bit over the hill. Okay, that's what I need to be thinking about being. That's what I need to become to lead this. And so it stretches me a bit, and I feel a little insecure in those spaces, because I'm like, oh my God, look at these people who are doing all those big things, and but that's the only way that's what I've always done in my life, has always been in spaces where people were always bigger than me or older than me or more advanced than I was in whatever the thing was. And then I sort of observed, and I'm like, oh, I could do that. I could do that. Eventually, I could do that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I always I've done some work, so I know the areas of my life that have particular woundings and hurts and traumas, and I'm very aware when they are being sort of irritated, right? And so I always know, I know what my body feels like when I am making a decision or I'm feeling a bit of a way, but it's not coming from anything of wisdom. It's coming from my younger spaces, or coming from the places of myself that have been healed. I have had, I have healed, but it's still tender. You still have these little wounds, and they have a bit, the scabs there.
The scar.
But if you do a thing to it, you kind of still feel it.
It's still there. Yeah.
So I think just being able to know when you're making decisions, or you're reacting to something that is hitting some tender spaces that haven't completely healed. So I'm not reacting, but I'm just like, oh wait, why did that? So I learned this practice a number of years ago, where if I'm sitting in a meeting, particularly because when you're interacting with people, that's when things happen. People are like, oh, I'm gonna go and be, go to Bali and just kind of like, be introspective. That's great and everything, and I think that's very important. But reality is, it's only when you're interacting with humans is when those things pop up. So what I would do was, if I'm sitting in the meeting and I find myself like reacting, and we all know the triggers that we know when our bodies, our heart jumps, or stomach flips, whatever the thing is. And I always sort of like, you're in a high stakes meeting, you don't have time. You cannot be pausing and saying, oh, inner self, what's wrong with you?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So I would always wait but I would make a note, check that out. And when I would go home and I would being able to have my internal time, I'd always sort of ask the questions, what's going on? What was it? Why was I triggered? What's happening? And then that's when I realized and I do all kinds of techniques to make sure that I'm being able to pull out the truth, right? Because again, our subconscious mind will give you all kinds of
oh yeah,
madness. Oh, it's because they said this or do this, but what's the truth?
yeah, exactly.
And then eventually, if oftentimes it's hitting my younger self, so I'll allow my younger self to have a voice, and that usually says, "Well, they just hurt my feelings because when she said that."
Wow.
Okay. So now that what's happening, it's and I love my younger self. I love them to just go play and have a good time. But you are not driving this bus.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're not driving the bus.
That's
so
right.
It also gives me opportunity to heal and to stretch, because the more I heal, the more I expand. So, and then the third thing is that I do is, for me, I oftentimes, I'm always reading to see sort of what are different ways to lead and to make impact. And because I realized my brain, I grew up at a certain time and space, and ideas and thoughts were of that time and space. So our collective consciousness has evolved since that time and space. But we like certainty. So we want to know that's what it was at that time and space. And so that's how it is today. But it's not, right?
Yeah.
So I think what I try to do is kind of figure out, I think it's Thomas Jefferson that says, in matters of style, go with the trend. In matters of substance, stand like a rock. So I often say, okay,
that's good.
And I have younger folks on my team, and they're fantastic, and they have all these fantastic ideas, and I think it's fantastic. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So they help me in matters of style.
Yeah.
Right? They're like,
yeah,
Kerry-Ann, nobody's doing it that way. Okay. And I've got 5 nieces. They help me in fashion. They're like, Auntie Kerry-Ann, no one is wearing that anymore.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, I try to say, okay, in matters of style, I'm going to go with the trend. However, in matters of substance, I will stand like a rock. So I'm going to this idea of, we couldn't get so-and-so, we couldn't get this confirmation. Well, did you pick up the phone and just call?
Right.
Just wondering. Because,
novel idea, right?
Because what we are going to do is respect the fact that other people are busy.
Yes.
And they're not here circulate. Our lives are not the center of their lives. Yeah. So if you're sending, I sent a bunch of emails and I sent them messages on LinkedIn yes, but did you call? Yeah. Because in the end, we're trying to get a thing done, right?
Bingo.
So I also think, what are the things of substance that I know to be true, and I'm going to hang on to those things, so that, and those are, what are my values? What do I believe? Yeah. How we operate with people, how do we respect people, how do we interact with people, and so I go with style, I stand with substance. And that allows me to expand a bit in how I lead. So I'm, and they're like, Kerry-Ann, that's going to take you so much time if you just do it this way. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to do it that way. You guys know better than me, right? I try to stay abreast of what's happening in the world. Like when AI happened, I interviewed a guy on AI stuff, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 6 weeks with you, and you are going to teach me everything you know about AI so we can put it into the business. Yeah. So, I wasn't scared about the whole thing or whatever, that kind of thing. We don't have time for that. We're trying to build a business. So I think that is also something, trying to assess where you need to, I know we want to have certainty all the time, and we want to, this is what I know to be true over here. It was, but the world has changed. The collective consciousness has moved on. There are other ways of thinking and doing and being. How do you do that, as well as not throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Hmm.
That's a journey of leadership, but I think it's an important one.
So good. Is there a book that has made a big difference in your journey that you would recommend that listeners put on their to read list?
Yeah. So I actually really do think The Big Leap is a good one.
Yeah.
Because The Big Leap is good for people, even if you're not in business, but it's really about how you are operating in your zone of genius within the world.
Yeah.
Because the first thing I often do when I speak with business owners is, okay, what's your life plan? What's your
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
Because you're building a business, but if there's no alignment between the business vision and the life vision, I
Yeah.
always say you got to tweak the business vision.
100%.
I mean, your life vision is all what it is. It comes from your innards. It comes from your
Yeah.
yasso or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you if your business vision doesn't align with your life vision at this stage of your life, then you want to realign that. But I think it's really important that you are operating in your zone of genius. I want everyone in the entire world, that is truly my value, my mission, is to get people living up to
Yeah.
their fullest purpose on this planet. I think we have dumbed down that
Hmm.
because, and I think that's one of the reasons we see all of this hurt and pain happening, because people aren't living up. They're living down. And I feel like they're
Right.
continually living down. So live up to what you are really, truly called to do.
Hmm.
So
So good.
that's one of the reasons why I really like that book, The Big Leap. And in terms of business, I am going to really recommend BE 2.0, Jim
Hmm.
Collins. I'm a
Yes.
humongous fan of Jim Collins.
Me
And
too. Yeah.
okay, right? Love him. And so obviously all of his books are fantastic, but BE 2.0 is sort of a love story to to entrepreneurs and to small and medium-sized businesses. And I think I guess one of the reasons why I love it is because the idea here is, one of his big books that's very much more popular is Built to Last, right?
Sure. Sure.
And people always think, well, his sort of thing is about big business, but they've misunderstood him. He came from his whole thing when he was, I think, at UCLA or Berkeley. I always confuse the two. I don't know which one he came from, but it's Stanford. He was at Stanford,
Hmm.
and he taught entrepreneurship. He's
Yeah.
all about entrepreneurship and small. The reason why the whole Built to Last sort of, several different books coming out of that was about, because he was trying to scientifically study what were the components of businesses that lasted.
Yeah.
What were the components that they had in common, as a way to be able to almost mimic or export those thoughts, move them into small business so that they can build, because every big business was once a small business. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
So a lot of people misunderstand his posture, but the BE 2.0 is almost a love story
Yeah.
for
It's
those of
true.
you who love it, to entrepreneurs, to small and medium-sized companies, because it just distills down some of the core issues, the core things. And to be honest, a lot of my methodology in my business is very informed by him, by his work, because I think it works. I've seen it work in my clients' businesses, but I've seen it work in my own. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah.
But that would be one book that I would recommend people read. So The Big Leap, Gay Hendricks,
Yeah.
and BE 2.0, Jim Collins.
Love it.
I know you asked for one, but I gave you two.
Give me two. It's a bonus. I love it. Kerry-Ann, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you for being so open, so transparent, and so informative. You've shared so many incredible insights today. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's such an honor. And I love sometimes talking with people to sort of riff about sort of life and business, because in the end, it's all together, isn't it?
That's it. Exactly. I know folks are going to want to stay connected with you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Well, I kind of hang out on LinkedIn a bit.
Yeah. There you go.
So find me there. Connect. I'm also on Instagram as well. I really do love Instagram too. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Send me a message. Say hi. Okay. Tell me you're in William's crew.
That's right.
And I'd love to connect. I really think that having those connections, human connections, is really, in the end, the most important thing.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.